so hard. But I can't. Hello, welcome everybody who are in the live, and welcome everyone who will be in the replay, who will be watching this. I hope everyone will watch this video in this interview once we are done. If you didn't get a chance to see it, welcome. We have Alaya Dawn Johnson here. I'm just really excited. You've been to my channel before I hit over 2K, because you were on my channel when I had like 300 subscribers.
Oh, okay.
I was little, I'm still little, but I was like little, And you also my first author interview. So it's good to have you back on the channel.
Wow, awesome. I'm so glad to be back. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for answering. I was like, let me shoot my shots in this email. So we have her here. She's written so many different things. Currently she's living in Mexico and Oaxaca.
In Oaxaca, yep.
Okay, Oaxaca. I'm like, I'm gonna say that wrong for sure. And she's doing her writing, doing some music, really getting into the stories that she has written and the stories that she will write. So we'll talk about those things today. Today we're going to focus most of the conversation on Trouble the Saints, because I'm obsessed with that book, and I just have some questions and we need to discuss that. I know a lot of people that I follow read your first debut novel and like really loved it and haven't gotten to Trouble the Saints. So this is your, I don't know. This is your call to get
Okay.
the Saints, for those out there. Also, I wanted to talk to everyone about just about you in general. So we're going to make sure we're talking about Trouble the Saints, talking about you, and also talking about Reconstruction that I got from the library. So shout out to the library doing the Lord's work. Amen. So I'm really excited about that. And I haven't read this one yet, but I also want to talk about that as well. So like always with my Blackoweenathon interviews, if y'all have a question in the live, please write question and then tell me what your question is. And before we get started, is there anything that you would like to say about yourself?
Just again, so I've written seven I think now novels for adults and young adults. Trouble the Saints is the most recent novel. Reconstruction is my short story collection. I live very rurally, so I hope that this connection does not like start getting wonky. But if it does, I promise I will try my best to get back. But I'm like living in the mountains on the coast of Oaxaca, and it's a whole experience. So
really living your best. We're here
yes.
for it. We're here for it. I hope you got a lot of sun. That vitamin D is what we need. Straight up.
Yeah.
I hope that's what you're getting. Okay. So I already put up banners for the questions, so everyone will get to see the questions. And this is the first interview I did this with. I should have did them with the other ones, but here we are. Just testing things out. So the first question I have for you is, tell us about your writing style. How do you choose time periods for your stories, create character development, and choose genres? And I'm really based this question off Trouble the Saints because I love historical fiction. So when I saw that you were writing historical fiction, I said, sign your girl up. She's there. She lives there now. So you can definitely answer that question.
Okay, awesome. So I mean, it's kind of like a huge question. So I could probably like teach a class on like everything that I, just because it's like the heart and soul of my writing process in a lot of ways. I mean, the time period is probably the part that's most like intuitive. It's just like with Trouble the Saints, it was just that I really wanted to get into certain historical aspects of the Black experience in the States, but I wanted to get at it like I wanted to get to a time period that would maybe like help explain some of the dynamics that like I see now, but that kind of that dig back. So I feel like when we go back into the past of like why are things the way they are now? We're always going back to slavery. I mean, for obvious reasons, but it's not just that. You know, there's like a whole long like history between like slavery and the civil rights movement, and we kind of just, it tends to kind of get like really like smoothed over as if it were like Frederick Douglass and then Martin Luther King. You know, I mean, obviously there's a whole lot in between those two. So you know, so I was interested in that. I was also because of a lot of kind of like personal history, like family stories. I mean, my dad's generation, my mom's generation, they're very much like the civil rights generation. So like I would be, the Trouble with Saints is more about like my grandparents' generation, you know. So I didn't ever talk to them about almost any of this stuff. I mean, really, my grandfather was born in 1900. I had a very different relationship. I mean, we didn't talk that much because he was 82 by the time I was born. You know, I mean, it was just like a lot of generation spanning. But I do kind of wonder about like his life. And kind of like, you know, like the span of time that he saw and like how it is that people are, you know, the way we think about like race and the color line and like how people thought about it back then is a lot of similarities, but there's some things that have really changed, you know. So a lot of that was just kind of like going through my head just because, you know, like I've been thinking about it. And I think at some point it just sort of like crystallized because I wanted to I was writing a crime story, you know, and I was like, I needed like a noir kind of a setting. And it's like a noir setting can be anywhere, like the 20s, 30s. But like I found myself like really pinpointing it at the beginning of World War II or the beginning of the US entrance into World War II. So that was like when I really realized that like I wanted it to be like then, like 41. Like I wanted it to be when like people were just beginning to like integrate. When I say integrate, I always feel like people don't it's always a little weird, the conversation around integration, because like Harlem clubs are integrated for a long time, you know, and when it was like it's ridiculous when people are like, oh, you know, it was like the first integrated speakeasy. I'm like Harlem had integrated speakeasies for decades. So like that's not exactly, you know what I mean? Like what we're talking about are places outside of Harlem, like non-Black owned integrated spaces,
Right.
you know, but like that 40s were when like the very first, like the Village had like the very first integrated, like white owned integrated space. And like big heavy hitters sang there, like Billie Holiday and people were like and it was a, you know, the Village was kind of one of those like mixing pot sort of places, like culturally, socioeconomically, there's a gender. I mean, it was one of those places where you could kind of get away with that basically. And so like that was when I ended up like setting it in the Village. So all of this kind of came organically because I was interested specifically in the color line, like in that kind of, I mean, gray area, but you know, like that place where like people weren't always towing the lines that people said that they ought to tow, you know, however you want to read that, you know. And so that was like, and I just, that time period just really spoke to me. And it was kind of only later as I was writing it that I realized, because of course, you know, like it's not as if slavery is like absent from like even in the novel, like of its understanding of like how these things, I just realized that slavery was as distant from the characters of that novel as that time period, the 40s, is from us now. So it's like in between, like that kind, you know, the time period, of course, is, you know, it's hundreds of years in itself. I mean, like all sorts of different things were happening in that time period. But let's say like between the end of the, you know, the end of formal non-incarcerated slavery and in our current time, you know, like that's right in the middle. And so I feel like it helped me sort of get a better sense of like the kinds of story I wanted to tell, to like understand that, because I wanted those connections. I wanted it to be about our history and about our present, you know. So like that was like how I got into that whole thing. I mean, and then, you know, character development, like the genre, like basically the genre and the time period, like were all very, you know, very like woozy, you know, like how am I, like, what am I trying to say, you know. But like once that happens, you know, the character development is a lot of trial and error, honestly. Like a lot of, you know, I had Phyllis LeBlanc was like my, you know, like my anchor character. I had her from the beginning, but like the other characters, Dev and Tamara, definitely required me to like spend a lot of time redrafting.
Yeah, I really like P. Very complex character. I think she is about that life, you know, on every way that you can say it. I wanted to talk about what you just said. You said formerly incarcerated slavery. What do you mean by that?
So this is like an issue that I've been like really, I mean, really I mean, I've been aware of this, I guess, since like for a while, but like I've really been focused on it since, especially like with Black Lives Matter being like kind of rising to more prominence and a lot of like focus on police violence. It seems to me like the other side of police violence, which we really can never lose sight of, is the violence of the prison system, and the violence against people who have been incarcerated. And I specifically refer to it that way because not everybody knows this, but like the amendment that abolished slavery only abolishes it for people who are not incarcerated. It is a giant loophole that says that slavery is totally fine if you're incarcerated. And and like that's not an accident, and it's not been forgotten by the people who are interested in that sort of a thing. And like there's literally prisons on top of where plantations used to be, and the like great grandchildren of those, or whatever, how many generations out we are now, like like fifth time great grandchildren of those former slave, or the slaves who are working there are still working like the corn plantations in Louisiana prisons. They're still working in the houses and in the federal houses, or sorry, the state houses.
Absolutely. I mean, when you said that, I said, okay, don't preach your ministry, because I hear you. Because like I've told you last time we spoke, I am a forensic therapist. So it's like I work a lot and have done a lot of work in prison systems. So this is things that I see often. This is conversations that I have often, and I talk to people about Angola. Like when I was in what was I? Oh my God, it was before Katrina. I was in oh my God, high school. There we go. I was like, what is the name of the school? I was in high school, and we had field trips to go to Angola, and it's slavery. Like there's no if, ands, but about it. It's slavery. So it's people don't want to have those conversations. It makes them uncomfortable, or they'd be like, oh no, it's not there. And I'm like, no, it is here. It's just in another form. And that form is called incarceration.
Yeah. So. And it's no accident that like people of color, especially Black people and Indigenous people, go to jail at, for amounts of time and rates that are just vastly higher than the, similar crimes for the white population, but also that crimes are literally being created that target, as in like written, this is now a crime. Like it was right. Like the difference between crack and cocaine. I mean, that was a big deal in the 80s, like that being stuck with being caught with crack was, what was it, like 80 times the punishment for being caught with cocaine. And it's like, one is just it's just a more concentrated version of the other. It's like not even a different drug.
Yeah. Yep. It's literally one is cooked and one is not, essentially. So it's just like, okay, don't get me started, right? We gotta.
Right, exactly. So that kind of those issues, and I feel like when I'm writing, in the 40s, is when a lot of those mechanisms are kicking in. Like they're basically like lynching is on this way. It's kind of going down a little, but there's this lull because Black people are going to enlist. There's basically like every time there was a world war, there was a huge number of Black people enlisted and laid their lives on the line and came back and expected to have that same more egalitarian treatment. And this was a huge issue at the end of World War I, which actually kind of like led to a lot of like the Red Summer and lynchings. I mean, like they're actually like kind of like a very direct relationship between Black servicemen coming back and very much expecting to have like that kind of respect for their service and or mobilizing for that, and then that being brutally repressed. And then what I'm writing about in the 40s is kind of like it's on the upswing again. Like they're not fighting back. That's going to be starting in the 50s and 60s, but it's sort of the precursor to it. And I found that kind of that sense of that inhaled breath, that kind of gasp, like what could happen, like what could we possibly achieve, what hope do we have, and how is it going to get crushed? Like that was the historical moment I wanted to emulate, possibly because I suspect that we might be in one similarly like now, like I don't know how things are going to turn out, but that there seems to be some kind of like possibility, but there's a lot that's coming down that might extinguish that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important that I talk about like a little bit of my love for historical fiction. So my love for historical fiction really comes from me being like a low key history buff. Um,
Hmm.
I'm here to just to know like little odds and ends and things about things that's happened in our past because what we don't want to do is repeat it, but on a lot of ways we are.
Yeah.
Um, if you know what I mean there, and I think it makes you such a stronger writer and such a stronger individual that you're like, okay, I'm going to research this, I'm going to figure this out, and then I'm going to intertwine it into my writing. And not only are you intertwining it into your writing and putting it like a fictional lens on it, in a way, it's also kind of like, I also want to connect with my grandparents, that intergenerational thing that you
Yeah.
talked about earlier of like, I didn't get to know grandpa because he was born in 1900, but I am making inferences on maybe what it could have been like for him, essentially.
Yeah.
I think was Dev a little dark skinned?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
He's darker than P.
Yeah.
But he's Indian. So
Yeah.
so there's all these like kind of like layers of like how colorism impacts them, and
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. We're gonna get to that
Yeah.
question. um Let me see if there's any questions. Oh, people. Yeah. It was required for everyone in my high school. We had to go to Angola.
Yeah, that is really intense. I was that did they like was that sort of a low key like abolitionist sort of a idea that they had, or did they
It could have
not?
been. It could have been, but the whole time I was just like, "Get me out of here! Get me, get me out of here!" I was like freaked out. So I mean, wasn't my finest moment, and I also was like, I think I was like 14, so I
Hmm.
can't really remember. I just turned 31. Your girl can't remember that stuff. That was a long time ago. Our second question is, you've been writing that I could find since 2004. When did you know you wanted to write as a career choice? Does experiencing blackness, I had to put B because they wouldn't let me put any more letters. So,
Ah.
does experiencing blackness, East Asian cultures, and Mexican cultures influence your writing?
It's yeah, I mean, obviously, very
Yeah,
much so. I majored in East Asian languages and cultures with a specialty in Japan in college.
yeah.
Um, I would not consider myself an expert in anything by any means. And as you say, it's all like a while ago now. I mean, I can speak like 3 sentences of Japanese at this point, sadly. But I mean, I was very much immersed in it for a while. It's definitely influenced my writing. It was the first place I ever traveled to on my own and really experienced as just like my own person. And like I hitchhiked around and I just kind of met people and I did all sorts of stuff. So like that really had a huge impact on me, just in terms of like my personal development and my development as a writer. And of course, like that like the love of travel and that kind of the weird ways you experience the world traveling alone certainly influenced me when I decided to come to Mexico in 2014. I didn't know anybody and I barely spoke any Spanish, and I just like came down and bummed around for a while and met some people. Then I started going to classes, and then I said, I love these classes and I love this university. I think I'm just going to stay
Yeah,
here and get a master's degree. That sounds like fun. And then I
yeah.
stayed, and then I was like, I'm definitely not going back. I feel very good here, so I just didn't go back. I just kind of moved everything over. So like I mean, obviously all that's going to end up influencing my writing. I mean,
Of
sometimes in kind of
course.
weird ways. It's not always like super obvious. I'd say like my first few novels, you can see a lot more like the East Asian and specifically kind of like island culture influences. And I mean, obviously like, I mean, I'm Black. I was raised, like both my parents are Black, but obviously walking that kind of color line in the case of my mom. And I I was very much raised in that tradition. And so like that like that's always like there, but it's not, I haven't always like figured out like how, or let's say I'm always negotiating like how it influences my writing and like what I want to do with it. Cause I very much write science fiction and fantasy. I don't, Travel to Saints is probably like my most like, I don't know. Trouble with the Saints and maybe Love is a Drug, my second young adult novel, are the ones that like kind of most closely parallel sort of like my real world Black experience. You know, like I'm really sort of like more like hewing more closely to like the real world,
Yeah.
but it's always there. Like, you know, it's always kind of part of how I'm always interested in how people relate to power and how people are pigeonholed, how people are repressed, how people try to fight back, how hard or possible it is to fight back. Like, I'm interested in utopianist visions of how to live differently.
Yeah.
Very much so. And then I'm always interested, because I can't not be, like, in complicating that and how they'll go wrong, you know. And so those are things that are just sort of like always, so like something like Trouble with Saints is very much, you know, like we know how it's going to go wrong, you know, like we know in a lot of ways, like, but it doesn't matter. I mean, part of the point of Trouble with Saints is like, even though this whole power structure is arrayed against them, they have this sort of like little power. They have the power of their saints' hands. And so like these people can get won over just a bit, not enough to like actually like shift a historical trend, but enough to get a little bit of breathing room around themselves. And I really wanted to write about that, because I feel like it's so important to like understand that even though you can be very much aware of like these historical processes and oppressions and stuff, it doesn't mean that there's like no joy. It doesn't mean that there's no moment where you might be able to come out on top or like actually have a victory against one of these oppressive powers. It's just that like over the course of, you know, millions and millions of interactions and millions of people, like that kind of gets flattened out. But on an individual level, it's still worth trying to fight, you know. So like that's I mean, I think it's worth trying to fight on a global level, right? But I think we have to organize and figure out how to actually make all of our fingers like close into a fist together, you know. Otherwise, like it's not gonna, you know, we're just like, you know, we're alone. Each of us are a wonderful universe into of ourselves, but we're not a power, you know.
Right.
We're a power together, you know. And so that's kind of part of also what I'm writing about, you know. But all of that kind of like wanders in.
Yeah.
And I'm always like kind of expressing it in different ways, you know. So Trouble with Saints was sort of like the way that it felt like. I mean, I spent a lot of time working on that novel, so it was definitely something that I felt like very strongly I wanted to try to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the power play in the book that you talked about is so easily like identifiable. I found that through multiple interactions. I even felt like that tug of power with like, you know, P being the hired assassin for this not mob place, but you know, mob organization. And then also P being very powerful and very known in her own regard, and like being like, do I stay with them? Do I, you know,
Right.
betray them? Do I do this? Do I do that? Even being with Dev, like that was also like, what is this? How do I figure this out? So it's, you know, it could be like, for me, I felt like, you know, do I be with a man when I'm already strong enough on my own, kind of thing. So I definitely saw those moments of power being happening in the novel as I read it.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to go to this comment. I'm definitely not going back rolling on the floor. This is how I feel when you said that. This is how I feel about, because next year, if everything goes well, I will be going to the continent for the first time in my life. And I'm going to the Gambia. And I just really feel like your girl ain't coming back. You know? Heading out. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like they should have never let me leave the US for the first time in 2012. Because now I'm like,
yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, got you big, like brainwashed. Like, it's like, you know, there's nothing better. And no, what? I'm sorry. Like, I'm not saying there's nothing, you know, but it's just, it's really, it's hard. You know, I have another friend of mine, like another sister who's like, I mean, she's been here longer than I have. She's been here like 12 years or something. It's the same thing. She came for like, because she was studying like Mexican history. And so she came to just like do some research, and she just kept going like, oh, I think I'm just going to stay here a little longer. I think I'm just going to, now she's just like, I can't now, I'm sorry. And I'm, you know, it's just weird because it's not that Mexico doesn't have its issues. It obviously does. And I mean, it also has anti-Black racism. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that the like by far the brunt of Mexican racism falls on its indigenous population.
Yes.
And being both American and Black, and like how they perceive me is kind of confusing. They're like, sometimes here where I'm living on the coast of Oaxaca, they do generally perceive me as Black, but in Mexico City, where there's many fewer Black people, like the coast of Oaxaca has like a ton of Black people, so it's like a total different experience actually. But like in Mexico City, they're just kind of like, well, like, are you from Colombia? Like, are you from, so like I don't have like that. They're not looking at me like, gringa, and so it has a. I just realized like you don't realize like how much it oppresses you until it's just not there, and I was like, wow, this is
nice.
kind of intoxicating. Like, I mean,
Right?
it's not that it has no problems. It's not, or anything like that. It's just that you don't, like, suddenly I don't have to deal with all that, like, weight and all those expectations and all of that. Like, are you, Black enough or not? Or what are you? Or what, what are you that great? Like all of that is gone. So I'm just like, okay.
Just living. I mean, you first talked about that when I interviewed you for Come On In. You talked about that, and I was like, "Well, that must be nice." So I recently went to Puerto Rico, and it just felt so nice. Like people were just living. Like I just didn't feel oppressed. I don't know if that's the word. Like
no, you just don't. You don't feel that thing.
I didn't feel like, I was like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave at all. I just want to stay. Like I just was just overwhelmed with just the beauty that people just assume that I spoke Spanish. Like other places I've been, they won't speak to me because it's thick. Like even the language is so wrapped up in anti-Blackness. And it's just, like hard, and people won't talk to me or walk away from me when I speak, right? That was a lot when I lived in East Europe. Like people just would not talk to me. So like people just coming up to me, asking questions. I'm fumbling over Spanish, and they're still like, "Yep, it's all right. You know what you're talking about. Go here, go there." So it was just like so wonderful to be in that space. And like I had to come back to where I live, and I think I may have told you last time, I live in a pretty white town, very white. Over what is Trump country, so it's just like I had to go from that beautiful feeling to come back here. It was a real struggle. It was a real struggle to come back here. Oh, and ain't that just Black living, making breathing room to live in discreet ways, even without structural implications.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Like I just wanted to have that like show up in a novel, like in a way where that, like I just felt like I needed to see that. I needed to write it.
And you delivered. You understood the assignment, and it was done. Right? You did that. Hold on, I can't wait for you to be able to leave that little white town. Me too. Okay, me too. Let's go to our third question. How does it feel to have Trouble the Saints be a World Fantasy Awarded finalist and be in company with Sylvia Moreno Garcia and Stephen Graham Jones? I don't know why I put T. Ignore that.
Awesome. I mean, it feels pretty damn cool. I actually cried when I got the news. I mean, I'm so happy. I'm also really happy that I got finally nominated for a World Fantasy Award after they ditched the Lovecraft statue, so I don't have to worry about having like that old racist man's head on my shelf.
I didn't even know they ditched it.
They did. It was a while. It was like a whole thing, right? I mean, it just took a while, but they finally gotten rid of him. So yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I haven't read. I really have to get on that, but I haven't read Mexican Gothic yet. But I have read all The Only Good Indians, and it's brilliant. It's so great.
Listen, Mexican Gothic, I felt like was there were some like taboo things that were being like pushed, but in a good way to me. I really liked that book. Two of the characters really can get these hands. I won't tell you, but I'm telling you, fiery hands, they can get it. Another book I think you might like of Stephen Graham Jones. If you are you into like slashers by chance?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Like it's not like my top flavor, but I can definitely get into them.
Not the top flavor.
No.
Okay. But his new book, My Heart is a Chainsaw, I really liked. I think Night of the Mannequins, I really liked. It's a shorter story. And then I want to read The Final Girls or The Last Final Girls, something like that of him. Definitely a fan. And then I just read another book by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which I really liked. Oh, The Beautiful Ones.
Oh, okay.
Good too. So that's me giving you some recs, just in case you need it. I don't know if
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I read Sylvia Moreno Garcia's first novel, which is like I can't remember the name of it now, but I did read it. I love that. I just haven't read it. I haven't read her more recent work, which I should get onto.
Because I thought maybe because of your history with Mexico and Spanish, I thought you would like, oh my God, it's something about gods, Jade.
Oh, yes, the Mayan novel.
Yeah.
Right. The Gods of Jade and Shadow.
There we go. That's why we keep you around.
No, don't quote me on that. I think that's what it's called. I'm not sure.
Okay, we're gonna roll with that.
All right.
Oh, Mongrels was also great. The werewolf thing took me out. It just
Okay.
took me out. I was like, man, this guy got a creepy mind. Love it. Love
Okay.
it. Okay. So let's move on to our fourth question.
Okay.
Some of the Saints discusses race and racial lines, and we already hinted to these things, but we can get more into the meat and bones. Do you connect with this on a personal level, and what were your inspiration for making the characters biracial or white passing, or white passing?
Right. Okay. So yeah, I definitely was very much like kind of like the number one almost thing on my mind once I'd kind of like gotten. I mean, I had the idea of this character, and I guess the idea of Phyllis P was I wanted to write a character who was strong and complicated and was the heroine of a passing novel that wasn't just like, like tragic mulatto and wasn't like, or which I hate even more, frankly, is like the yellow Jezebel kind of trope. And so I just, and I was like, I needed to like have this dealt with in a way that felt more real, like that was actually kind of like deep and honest, because it's to be perfectly honest, it's so much a part of like the African American descendants of slave experience. Like I know that there's all sorts of different diasporic African groups, and it's not always going to be the same for all of them. But like for people like in my family, and I feel like this was important to me because, like I said earlier, I was thinking about my grandfather born in 1900, and the thing about my grandfather is that he was very light skinned. He was very light skinned, but his birth certificate says Negro on it, and he was very much his entire life part of the Black community, and it was just one of those. I feel like nowadays it's a little, I don't know, but confused, but it's changed because there's many people who are biracial, as in like their parents are in a relationship together and they have birth to biracial children, and that's not really what was going on. I mean, I'm not saying it never happened, but I mean, basically, like, a white man or a white person and a Black person shacking up and like living together was something that was almost impossible to happen without, lynch mobs coming out, basically. So what, a lot of people who looked like me, back in the day were just from light-skinned families, like people who literally it dates back to like literally like light-skinned people on the plantations, and like that we know that had nothing to do with like consensual anything, so like to me it's frankly it's a legacy of violence is what I'm trying to say. And so to understand why, like what our role is in like these Black communities, and we, what I mean, like we've always been part of them. I mean, I say like my dad's family isn't nearly as light skinned as my mom's family, but there's always like a rainbow in any family, and that's kind of part of it's kind of part of the issue. You look at the picture, there's a picture of all of my aunts and uncles. My grandma had 10 kids, with my grandma and that granddad was born in 1900. And like, it's like everybody. Everybody. You could just see like from like the whole like rainbow is there, and the whole like on both sides of the color line. And like I felt like that was really important to bring out. That it's not just like, like, are you biracial, or you're like your mommy's white or your daddy's white, and like so. You kind of are part of the Black community, but you're kind of not. Like, no, I don't think that's not how my mom grew up at all. It's not how my aunts grew up at all. It's like, it was how I grew up, and to some extent, but only because of, there's that whole other thing of internalized anti-Blackness, and my parents desperately wanting me to be able to be like conversant in white world. And they really, really, really like, they pushed that to a degree that I now kind of wish that they, had like allowed me to experience my own culture more, outside of at least like my own immediate family, but, well, like, I mean, what can I say? Like the 90s, man. But so basically, like, it's just one of those, it's just kind of the way that every generation confronts it. But when I talked to my parents, it was just, and especially talked to my grandparents, it was really clear. Like they, it didn't really matter. Like you could be on one side or the other. You could even go and pass, I mean, people would do that. They would, I mean, when I started reading stories of passing, I was really like shocked. I mean, not shocked because it made like an intuitive sense to me, but shocked because like the stories I had heard, like, or that come in the media of passing are like, you abandon your family because you were ashamed of them, and you go and you live with white people, and you can never say the name of like, of your family before, and you have to ignore them on the streets. And like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't think like that describes the passing experience of like even like a tiny fraction of people. Like, I think if they, there are stories of like a pair of bankers in Harlem who passed, and they would just go downtown and like, pass. And then they would live up in Harlem. And like, just because, nobody who they worked with downtown ever came up to Harlem, they like didn't have to worry about it at all. And people in Harlem knew perfectly well what they were doing. And that was like, that they were very much part of their community is what I mean. It's not about abandoning your community. It's not about being ashamed of anything. It's about having to navigate a racist society. And a lot of times, people who could pass were able to bring things back to the community that for people who couldn't pass, like those sorts of more complicated relationships. And I guess I wanted, and it's not that there isn't obviously like a crap ton of privilege that comes on top with that, and like all sorts of other like darker angles. I mean, Passing by Nella Larsen is a brilliant novel, and like very much gets into all of this. Well, it's not like no one's ever written this novel. I'm just saying, like, when I was starting, I just had like these really bad, like really bad kind of like stories in my head, and I just needed something else, And so that was kind of like what started me, and started me on that path. And then like the more I understood, really, the more I read books by people who were older than me, like more I read about my like, books written by my grandparents' generation or my great grandparents' generation, the more I understood so much about like the things that my mom would say or the things that my grandmother would say. It was so strange to me because it was like I'd heard these things, but I just didn't have any context for them. I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. And then like suddenly I was like, I like had entered the world, and I like suddenly saw all of the context for like how we'd been living and like why we were living this way, like why my mom and my grandmother were like so intense about speaking good English, and like why everything
intense.
so intense.
I'm like, we gotta just let this go.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said like other experiences of passing. So on my YouTube channel, I have a video of me talking to my grandma. So I read Passing by Nella
Larsen.
Nella, there we go. I always say it wrong. So Larsen. That's what I'm gonna say that, and that's what we're gonna be. And I called my grandma because my grandma mom was a twin. And they both were very dark skinned, darker than me right now. And my grandma is your skin complexion.
Okay.
And my father is my skin complexion, and my grandma came out looking like you.
Yeah.
So like it's just what it is, right?
Yeah.
My great grandma had 10 children, and of those 10 children, they all have the same mom and dad. But 4 of them came out as your complexion or lighter, and then the other ones came out darker than me. So
yes.
So I asked my granny all the time, it's like, do you know if there's a difference between how the world see you and how the world see your siblings? Because that is like
Mm-hmm.
one of the issues I have with my siblings. So one of my siblings is your skin complexion, and both
Mm,
of our parents are black. But
right.
I mean, not black, but dark skinned black, so
Mm-hmm.
darker skin. And I constantly have to be like, sis, the world views you differently than they view me. Like, just trying to get her to understand, like, there's a light skin privilege that's happening, and like
Yeah.
we have like issues, or not issues, but like discussions about what that is. And like when I talk to my grandma, because I'm reading Passing and I'm like, wow, this lady said, I'm gonna head out. I'm not gonna be a part of this black community. Her
Right.
husband is calling her nig. I'm ready to fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, she's like, I'm ready to throw the clothes. I'm about to on site is still on site to me. So I'm just like, Granny, let me tell you what's happening. And she's
Yeah.
just like, oh baby, that none of that happened. she's like, she's like, my siblings were lighter than me, and we was just living. Like nobody cared. Like people were just living. And I was just like, no, but Granny, in the book they said all of this. And she's like, baby, none of that happened. And I'm sitting here like, huh, interesting.
Uh-huh.
Because like you said, you get this storyline from media being like, oh, you have to disown your family and do all these other things. And it's like, that's not the typical experience of passing.
No. No, it's not at all. I mean, I read one memoir. I love this memoir so much. It's called American Cocktail by Anita Reynolds. Man, this woman, she just like she had a life and a half. Like and I love her so much because she was, some people, criticize her because she seems like very blasé about, like things of the day. I mean, she had like a run-in with W.B. Du Bois that sounded kind of horrible. I was like, oh damn. But she was off like, yeah, I mean, she was off like gallivanting around Europe, and she just had that, and that whole thing we were talking about, how like you escape the States and you're like, whoa, 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 like suddenly everything is so different. Like why would I go back there? I mean, there's actually like a couple of like Langston Hughes short stories that talk about that. I mean, it's a real experience, and so she had very much like she had all these experiences, but one of the things that she did, she was actually one of the first like Black film stars. She starred in the first few like movies in the teens. She was on the cover of like, she was one of like Ebony's cover girls. I don't even know. This woman just like, she just did a whole thing. And she would sometimes do things like pass, but she would pass as Mexican, or she would just pass as some other, brown person that like had more privileges because of how anti-Black US society is. So in order to do things like take ballet class, I mean, it's very much like a woman of a certain kind of class and social privilege. I mean, how else is she going to be hanging out with W.B. Du Bois? But like all of these, I just found it so fascinating because first I just loved like her joie de vivre and her like the way that she described things. I kind of personally like found her to be like very fun, a fun read. But I just thought it was really interesting because like that to me is a much more likely and common story of passing. And in my, and again, in my family, it's like your family, like we got a wide range of skin color. And so, some of my aunts and uncles couldn't pass. I mean, you got to be joking, and others totally could, but they didn't, I mean, like my aunt, who's like the lightest of all my aunts and uncles, she's the one who's like a deacon in the Pentecostal church. She doesn't, there's nothing like that. She, like there's no idea in her head of like using that to like get ahead or leave our community or anything. I mean, that's not the way that they were raised. That's not kind of how they think about things. And I think that that's so important because, ironically, like P does. I mean, she does sort of pass in the sense of, but she doesn't abandon her community. Like she doesn't abandon her family. She goes back. She like, they all know her. They know what she's doing. What I mean? Like none of them are sitting around like, oh, where do you disappear to? No, I mean, they understand. Like the rents in Harlem are horrible. The apartments are, nightmares, or like, like all of that is still true. So and that's, another thing I discovered, like that Harlem residents had to pay like way more than anybody else in the city for those apartments because they wouldn't rent to Black people anywhere else in the city. So one of the things about passing was literally like, it's cheaper.
That is true. That is true. Dang, even thinking of it on a uh, economical level.
Mm-hmm.
I think I even thought of that myself. Um, well, while aside passing, I haven't heard. Question: where did you do the bulk of your research for it?
Yeah, like definitely a lot of those like memoirs, novels. Like I try to go back and read things written by Black people at the time, like people who are talking about passing. Like I read these Links and Shoes short stories, which I adored, adored. I was like, everybody needs to read. It's called The Ways of White Folk.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
I'm reading Not Without Laughter currently because I'll be talking about that on my channel
mm,
Sunday. So
okay.
the ways of white folks I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, it's highly recommended, and it has a couple of stories in there that deal with not necessarily all. They're not, they're not like always about passing, obviously, but they do a lot of stuff around the color line, and so that was like, obviously kind of like the brunt of my, like, how did people understand or think about? I mean, it turned out really that people don't think about it super differently back then than they think about it now. It's just that now there's that, like I said, like the kind of complicating factor, which is that back then, like interracial relationships were just, if they happened, they had to be so clandestine that it wasn't like you were going to be likely to have a bunch of children raised under knowing and having relationships with both parents. So that has very much changed our understanding of like mixed race or mixed, whatever, we just call ourselves mixed, like
Yeah.
people, like light skinned Black people. Like it's very much changed like our current understanding, like my generation and below basically.
Yeah.
But even so, there's a lot of like ways that people talk about things that kind of only make sense when you put it back in this context of our past, and how, again, light skin in a lot of ways, the reason why our families can have that wide range is because of violence in our past. It's literally like encoded in our genes. And like
Mhm.
like most of those relationships were not going to be consensual. I'm sorry, like people think that Sally Hemings and Jefferson was some kind of great romance. Like what? No, like, no.
Not
I
you
mean,
people for Phil.
I mean, some asshole wrote a whole like romance novel about this like a few years ago, not even like a while ago. Okay, like 4 years ago.
I hear I'm not deep into romance because I mean I think I've told you before that I don't read romance a
Hmm.
lot, but I hear that there are folks who are trying to make slavery romance.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you
I mean, I
say,
think from like the moment, I think frankly, like that's what like the South is all about. That, like, the white South, obviously, it's all about like trying to romanticize it and turn it into like, it's just ridiculous. But I feel like,
the South.
it's like the Key and Peele sketch. Did you see the Ancestry.com? I mean, this is like my favorite Key and Peele sketch of
Uh-uh.
all time. The Ancestry.com sketch where the white people are like, one of my ancestors is Charlemagne. And then the Black woman, Thomas Jefferson. Like, oh, I was like, Charles the Great, Thomas Jefferson. It killed me.
I
It's
haven't seen
so
this.
great.
I want to see it. I want to write that
Oh my
down.
God, no! It's like, and it's just great. Like in one moment, it's like Thomas motherfucking Jefferson, and I was like, this is just, I'll never forget this. Like every time me and my friends are talking about something, this are just like Thomas motherfucking Jefferson.
Oh man, that's too good. Man, them two do make funny sketches.
Yes.
They are funny. Man. Uh just forgot what I was saying. I was like deep in the laughter. Um, we'll let it go. We'll let it go. Hopefully, maybe it'll come back. I don't know. Um, so do you have a special connection to writing short stories and essays? Like, do you like doing that more than writing full novels or novelettes, as they call them?
I mean, I like them both. I actually write more novels than anything. The issue is that it takes me a
Oh,
long time.
okay.
I'm just slow. I'm so slow. And then plus, like, I had the 7 year gap between was it 6 year gap between Love Is the Drug and Troubled Saints. That was mainly just I was moving to Mexico and I was learning Spanish and I was getting a master's degree, so like things just sort of took their time. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love writing short stories. I don't do it as much. as I used to. Like when I was younger, I definitely, when I was starting out, I wrote more. I think it was because it allowed me to experiment with lots of different styles without committing to like a whole novel.
Yeah.
But like my whole writing process has slowed down. Like I started writing just more complicated novels. Like Trouble with the Saints is just, it just required a lot of work. It was like truly some like 6 major rewrites, just like a lot of work.
Oh, 6 major rewrites?
Yeah. Like just the last section, just Tamara's section, I like page 1 rewrote it like twice. Like I just threw it out and started again twice. So it just was a
Wow.
lot of work.
You had to do what you had to do.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
stinks.
I mean, and it was worth it. It was just one of those things where, so I would say like the short story writing is maybe what I'll do when, somebody will ask me and I'll say, okay, and I'll like kind of put things aside and work. And then I like it because it's a kind of smaller band, like it's a smaller kind of project. And then I can say, woohoo, I actually did something, because meanwhile I'm going back to like my white whale over here, which has taken me so many years and I'm just sitting here like, will I ever finish it? So yeah, they're kind of synergistic, let's say. Like I always, and essays, I mean, every once in a while, I have a hard time with essays though. Like I never know if they should be like very personal or not. Like the one I wrote for Come On In was like the first time I'd managed to write an essay that I liked in years,
I
which is,
liked it. I told you. I was like, is she talking about my life? I felt very seen.
yeah.
I felt very seen. So when we talk about Reconstruction,
hmm
what do you want readers to know about this book?
Um, well, it's a collection of stories over the course of like 15 years of my career. So it's pretty eclectic. So that could be good because it means there'll probably be something you like. There's 2 vampire stories in there. They're very different from one another, like very different. So you could probably get like a sense of my range from how the way I'm playing with those tropes in that story. And then the title story, ironically, I feel like if you read a title story, I mean, not ironically, but just it's sort of interesting that the title story is a longer short story, it's a novelette, and I feel like in a lot of ways you could see it almost as like my prequel or like the companion piece to Trouble the Saints. It's like, as I said, the Trouble the Saints is in between, literally, like the end of the Civil War and now. This is kind of me going back. So it's me going to taking the story of a company laundress in the first African American regiment in the Civil War, the first South Carolina, and this is based on the story of Susie King Taylor, who wrote a memoir about it, and she's brilliant and amazing. And so I kind of it's not her life at all. It's just but I'm very much indebted to her. And that's in her memoir. And so I went in there and it deals a lot with like these issues that we're talking about. I mean, not so much the passing stuff, but about like power and how we're connected to our ancestors and how we can try to take something and what it meant for the slaves to be in the Civil War and to fight for their freedom, and not this like passive bullshit story that we received in high school, like, well, like when Lincoln gave us our freedom. No, I mean, Lincoln didn't give a shit about our freedom, like it was about actual, like,
The honesty for me.
African people in the Americas, not all of whom were slaves at all. I mean, there were freedmen who came down from the North and joined those regiments. There were people who freed themselves. And I mean, that's like really the story of a lot of these regiments. There are just so many people who just up and left their plantations and fled over the border in order to enlist. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just and those regiments were in large part why the North won the war, and so the fact that like that groundswell of genuine popular fervor kind of led to Reconstruction, which was then brutally stomped out, and like is kind of like the cycle of Black life in America ever since in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, like a kind of surge of opportunity and joy, and finally being able to like, realize our promise, and then brutal repression, and I mean, and I wanted to get at that particular moment because it felt to me like that cycle. I guess I wanted to have something that dealt with the hope as much as it dealt with like the brutality of the repression. So I kind of told it through that story. So that's like, I don't know. The stories, however, run the gamut. I would say probably like stories of oppression and and power. You know, like explorations of power is probably like the part that aligns or unites every story in there.
Okay. I think a couple I don't know when, but it was recent on my channel. I just been finding myself reading a lot of novels by Black women, and what I'm finding to be different and also like refreshing is our ability to be so intersectional in our approach at literature. And I think that you do a wonderful job at that. And just basically what you're talking about. Like we're talking about power, talking about racial lines, we're talking about colorism, we're talking about a time period. We're talking about that hope. We're talking about that oppression. We just have such a um, authentic, I think is the word I want to use, authentic way of storytelling that
Yeah.
from multiple different facets.
Yeah, and I think it's like lived experience. You know, there's that. Yeah, like there's a way I'll read these sorts of themes from other writers who maybe don't have that personal experience, and you can it feels kind of flat, you know. So
I mean, you told your truth.
yeah.
You definitely told your truth there. Okay, let's go to our. Ooh, I'm like time. Okay. So, what is next for you? What should we be on the lookout for? Something more
Um,
the Saints adjacent?
Something totally different. Like pause everything I've been talking about, like historical fiction and like no, I mean this is it's all related, but yeah, I have a far future like space operas, young adult novel
Oh,
that I mean, and it is an epic. I'm like it's basically like War and Peace in space. It is epic.
whoa.
So it's all about that. It's all about like like how do we conceive of peace? Like what is I'm going like straight to like Martin Luther King, you know, like it's peace, like the presence of justice or the absence of conflict, you know, like what do we mean when we say that something that we've achieved a peace, like what, whose peace, who is in control, like all these questions, but it's very much like deep far future. So there's no like cultures that are like really analogous to ours, but it's very much, this is probably one of my novels that's like most influenced right now by my experiences in Mexico. So like that kind of permeates a lot of it. It's very much about like kind of like Afrofuturism, like
Oh,
very much so. I mean, it's like imagine, you know, that a civilization like even like before the Sahara Desert like turned into a desert basically,
yeah.
like
Wow.
had managed to like go to the stars and then came back and then was able to like uplift the rest of humanity. So it's like it's just big. It's
Oh,
all big and
I
so it's
love
kind of
that.
like the closest thing I've written that's similar to it is a Summer Prince, but it's bigger. It's just like
Okay.
it's a big old thing. So I'm really excited about this. I'm so excited that I think I'm this close to having like a finished draft at last of a lot of rewrites and stuff. Um, you know, I don't know what's gonna come out. It's under contract. I mean, it's going to be published by Scholastic, but there's just you
Oh,
know, trying to figure out scheduling. So maybe
okay.
next year, maybe 2023.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is good things. I'm wondering, have you read anything from N.K. Jemisin, Nora for short?
Yes, of course. I am. Yes, obviously. I mean, I love the Broken Earth trilogy. Oh my
It's
god.
really good. It's really good.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
gay,
Like
but
that
it's
is
the truth
just
that on gay.
yeah. No, it's just it's brilliant. She's brilliant. I know. I mean, I've known Nora for years, so yeah. Like it's yeah. Like
You
it's
know,
just
we're
you know
that
it's.
light brag. You know, we're that light brag. Me and Nora, we go way back. Me and Nora.
No, man, we really do. Like, I don't. It's so weird. Like that part of things is just because like you're like a writer in New York and you meet people and like we were in a writers group together and like
Wow.
you know so but I mean it was like neither of us had been published really, you know, so we were just hanging out and like you know going to like conventions together, you know. But I mean she's brilliant, like, and she was brilliant back then too. It's just like I think it's wonderful that we're finally getting our due and that she's like just been able to, and that 3 time Hugo not like win that. I mean, I don't know who else is ever going to manage that. I mean, it's a coup and totally deserved.
I don't know anybody. What I'm just excited for from our girl Nora is that she sold the rights to a couple of her books, so we're waiting for the TV shows.
Yes. Well, you know, there's always like a tough road between like selling the rights and it actually getting produced, but I think like this time it sounds like we're closer. It's more likely to happen. So fingers crossed.
I hope that happens. We putting it out.
Yeah.
You know, I have some people who I would love to be cast, but you know, I get it.
Right.
Gotta choose. Cause like recently Ray Barrier by Jordan E. Fueco just got picked up by Netflix.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I'm in my mind, like, if the lady isn't Angela Bassett, I'm not watching it. I'm not paying attention. Like, I just feel like, who's gonna do it better than Angela Bassett?
Well, but you know, then there's contract negotiations and you know.
It is. Okay, so our last question is you want to tell us about your music?
Okay. I mean, so when I moved to Mexico, I started hanging out with like a bunch of like very cool bohemian like artist types. And anyway, you know, it's like one of those things where you go to parties and then you're hanging out and then someone is like, play a song. And so, you know, that started happening. And this friend I had who was a co-owner of a bookstore. This is how I met all these friends. It's like a feminist, like socialist anarchist bookstore that I would like write. I would go there and write, you know. So like I met all these people and like met my partner there too, you know. It was like everybody. And so the co-owner, he basically was like, hey, you know, I ran into like my old guitar teacher. Do you want to like do something? Like, you want to like see if we could start a band? Basically, I said, yeah, that sounds cool. So like we just sort of picked up people, and I'd written a couple of songs for the first time in my life. Like moving to Mexico just opened that up for me. So I suddenly started writing music, which was kind of amazing. I'm not. It's not like I'm not trained. I don't have any kind of, you know, I would not say that my compositions are like utter genius, but I mean, I really, really enjoy writing and singing. I mean, I just love singing. Singing is like the first part. And so then like writing music was like the whole, you know, now I can like do something else with it. And then the story, like the songs kind of like tell stories. Sometimes there's actually one of the short stories I wrote recently, which was in oh my gosh, what the heck is that? A Phoenix First Must Burn.
Yeah.
So that edited by Patrice Caldwell. So it's a brilliant anthology, and like one of those stories is called my story in that is called The Rules of the Land. And so that short story is basically based on a song. Like I have a whole song that's about, it's like a song cycle, but that short story is like the first song of the song cycle. That's all about like a girl whose mother is like the daughter of Yamaya from the sea, and like his father basically like steals the mother's skin, and so it's kind of like a Selkie story, like a Yamaya story, and so she goes, so like her mother is kind of like stuck there, and then like the daughter ends up going back to the sea and then has like her own relationship with it, and it's like it's all about kind of like intergenerational trauma and being kind of in between worlds and the legacies of our parents and all that. So like all that is in the short story, in the songs as well. So like so that kind of stuff, being able to like go back and forth between my short stories and my singing was like very exciting for me. And sadly
natural for you.
Yeah, I mean, once I started doing it, I was like, this is amazing. I also wrote a song that was about my like this giant epic War and Peace novel that is coming out. Like I have like all these novels of mine. I'm like, I should have written a song for Trouble with the Saints, but I couldn't quite, because I needed it to be kind of, I can still do that. I was like, it needs to be kind of like Bessie Smith like, but I was like, I got kind of intimidated basically. There's a really, really good, like just those singers of that generation are so good, and I was like, I can't. I feel like kind of embarrassed to try, but I should try.
Like Billie Holiday.
Yeah, it's just like I don't, I just every time I think about it, I'm like, oh, Alaya, but like they're gonna. I mean, you're not Dinah Washington, you know what I mean? So I don't know, but I should try. Like, why not? I mean, I don't have to be Dinah Washington to enjoy myself. So that's so yeah. So I mean, that's kind of like how it turned out, and that was so much fun for a few years. But then the pandemic happened, and that just stopped. Like getting in a small room and like vocally projecting, for hours on end is basically like the worst thing you can do in the middle of the pandemic. So
worst thing you can do.
Yeah, so it just kind of ended. Oh, thank you. I should put the song out, so that people can actually hear the song that goes with the story.
Yeah, that was my next question. Are we gonna get it?
Like,
get that?
Right? No, I don't think we ever recorded that one. No. Yeah. All right. I should like say something. If I can find a recording, I'll like say like, hey, here's a little, because I play the guitar really badly, so it's like not fun for anyone to hear me like play and sing my own songs. I need someone better than me to be playing.
Yeah. The guitar is always something I wanted to learn, but I was like, do you have the time? It's probably going to be a no. You don't have the time. So I just did it. And I just listen to other people do it. I've always wanted to like be really good at an instrument, and I think that's because I'm from New Orleans, and I was like, it's music, it's all around me. I want to learn something, but
right.
Your girl was like, nah, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it at all. And I'm adding a question, but my last question to you, and then I'm gonna let you go, is how do you want us to support you?
I mean, I'm delighted with what you can do. I mean, I always feel like, I mean, if you can buy a book, please buy a book. But like, I am like number one up there on like list of people who like rarely have money to spend on a lot of book buying. So like ordering it from the library or like requesting it from your library is big. I mean, if you do that, then if you leave a review somewhere, tell a friend about it. Yeah, I mean, like I love it. Like I love it. There's some writers who are weird, like, oh, how are you going to bring a library book to me? Like, what? Please bring a library book. Like I don't care. Like that's great. That's great. Like I love libraries. Like I don't even understand.
I love the library. I do.
I just love them. And I mean, like not all of us can buy. I mean, and again, I don't like this whole kind of like super capitalist mindset around like reading and enjoying art. And I just like, I get it. I mean, I need to eat. Like I would like to get some royalties. Don't get me wrong. But like, I'm not about to sit around and like demand that like to interact with me, you must have like spent money on something though. So just like talk about it, like if you could people just like talk to a friend or recommend it or check it out or like have a conversation about it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's like the most amazing thing. And that's what I write for, for people to like get something out of it or like have it spark an idea and talk to somebody else and have, like that to me is like the best. That's the absolute best, and everything else is gravy, including my royalties. Like, so that's that's what I'd say. I mean, if you could get the word out, but just more than that, just sort of like get into it and share that's amazing.
Nice. Well, thank you for coming again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
I'm probably gonna message you again. So
yes.
Get ready for that. Thank you everyone for coming in the chat and like saying, wonderful interview and just saying all the good things and just being here. You are my third to last author for the Blackoweenathon authors. And I've interviewed quite a few people. And I'm very excited and happy that all of y'all said yes. So I appreciate that. And I'll let you get back to your day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate so much like the work you do. It's just so amazing, like bringing like attention to Black writers and like getting everyone excited about like our work and like actually, really incisive questions. I mean, it's just like, what we live for. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, you're doing the work. I'm just showing up. Okay.
We're both doing the work. We're both doing it.
I mean, if
Our
you
own work.
exist, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we will let you go and talk to you in the future when you hit us with
Okay.
the War and Peace space situation.
Yes. You will hear from me when that comes out. All right.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Okay. Alrighty. Bye.